Hi, I'm Isaac, and today we will be counting down my top 5 European cities. Now, I haven't been everywhere in Europe, and there are certainly places I'd still like to visit. However, of the places I've been, these are my favorites. Number 5, Tallinn, Estonia. I honestly found the Baltic states to be one of the more interesting corners of Europe. I visited the capital of every nation, Riga, Vilnius, and Tallinn. I think they are all worth visiting if you are ever in northeastern Europe. All three of these nations were once part of the Soviet Union. However, today they are independent, democratic, and part of the European Union, so they are easy for an American to visit. But will still give you a glimpse of what life was like behind the Iron Curtain. But it's not just Cold War history you will find in these cities. All three cities have historic old towns, where you can walk around and feel like you were visiting the city centuries ago. These old towns are a hotspot for art and culture today. They are contrasted by modern buildings that come from growing economies. Riga features a beautiful park with a river through it in the city center, and I was lucky enough to be there for some fireworks as well. Riga and Vilnius are very cheap. Even in peak tourist season during the summer, I was able to stay at hostels for less than €10 a night. I got a private room in Riga for I think around €25 a night. Public transportation was cheap and very available. Tallinn was a little more expensive as it seems to have been discovered by Western tourists. Still, it was not expensive compared to Western Europe. It was also probably the most impressive of the three cities as it featured an enormous old town that showed signs of many different cultures. You had castle walls and cathedrals that you would expect to see in Western Europe right next to Eastern Orthodox style churches. This is in a city filled with cobblestone streets that feels like a time capsule back to the Middle Ages. Number 4. Prague, the Czech Republic. While the old towns in the Baltic may have been impressive, Prague's old town is like a fully intact medieval city. It doesn't just go on for a few blocks, it seems to go on forever and is filled with one building after another that was built close to 1,000 years ago. It features beautiful bridges, the world's largest castle, and even its own Eiffel Tower. The old town square serves as a center for all of this, and even in winter when I was there were still street performers and it seemed to be a hot spot for art and culture. Prague has close to 1,000 years of fascinating history. It was once the capital of the wealthy Kingdom of Bohemia and a home to Holy Roman Emperors. More recently, it was the capital of Czechoslovakia and was occupied by communists during the Cold War. Now it is the capital of the Czech Republic. Unfortunately, the weather was not super cooperative when I was there, so I did not get the greatest photos. I can imagine the city is even more beautiful when you see it with the sun shining. Number 3. Athens, Greece. Now most people I know who have been to Greece went during the summer when it was hot and swamped with tourists. Therefore I've met a few people who did not have a great impression of Athens. I'm not sure I would have liked it if I had gone then. Instead, I went during the winter, when it was maybe 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius out. This might not be ideal beach weather, but it's good weather for roaming around the city, and there was so much to explore. Athens has been called the birthplace of modern civilization. It features, by some measures, the world's oldest theater, the world's oldest democracy, and the world's first philosophers. It was also one of the wealthiest and most dominant city-states in ancient Greece, and features incredible architecture from a civilization that believed it had perfected beauty. Even with most of these buildings in ruins, you could still feel like the Greeks may have accomplished this goal. Unlike Rome, Athens was not heavily populated during the Middle Ages, and so when the modern city was built in the 19th century, they built it around these ruins and left them plenty of space. The Parthenon and Acropolis were an absolute must-see, although I enjoyed the ancient Agora more, as it was less crowded and gave you more of a glimpse into everyday life of ancient Greece. I was able to visit the Temple of Hephaestus with hardly anyone else around. The neighborhood around the Acropolis, known as Plaka, featured old buildings, shops, and culture. Because I was there during the tourist off-season, everything was very cheap. You could go out to dinner at a nice restaurant with a view of the Parthenon, get some delicious Greek food and wine, and have the total bill only come out to about €7 per person. If you go to Athens, you should also get out of the city and make sure to make it to the ocean, and also to see some Greek countryside. Number 2. Paris, France. Now all the cities I've featured so far are relatively cheap to visit, and that is not always the case with Paris. The first time I went there was during the spring. I was only there for a couple of days. This is probably when the city is its most beautiful, but it was also crowded and very expensive. If you go at this time, make sure to go to the Luxembourg Gardens. With all the plants in full bloom, you'll feel like you're in heaven on earth. Unfortunately, I wasn't seriously taking photos yet at this time. I made it back to Paris over the winter and found the city to be a lot more affordable and less crowded, but probably not quite as beautiful. Still, it was definitely worth visiting. I was able to find things to do which I didn't do the first time. I actually made it up the Eiffel Tower. This view is about a third of the way up, which shows you just how high the tower is. If you really want to freak yourself out, you can walk on the glass floors. All of the famous sites like Notre Dame, the Louvre, the Conciergerie, and Sacré-Cœur were worth seeing, but you could spend days just wandering around the city and marveling at the beautiful old architecture. Even most non-famous buildings were works of art. Another place worth seeing in the city is the catacombs, if you'd like to see thousands of human skeletons. If you are in Paris, you should also try to make it out to Versailles. This is about 40 minutes away by train. It is where the French royals lived, and it felt like it was designed to be as ridiculously extravagant and expensive as possible. This is another place that is probably even more incredible in the spring or summer, but that's not when I visited. You can understand why they cut the royals' heads off, knowing that they were living like this. Number 1 on my list is Edinburgh, Scotland. Now I'll admit I'm a little biased on this one, since this is the only European city I've actually lived in. However, this is my list of my favorite cities, so who cares? The city has an enormous amount of history and beautiful architecture, but with less than 500,000 people, it feels so much more personal than other larger cities. The city's Old Town is a portal back to what Scotland looked like in the Middle Ages. The New Town in Princes Street featured shops, gardens, and a trip back to the 18th century. The whole city is under the watchful gaze of the castle. Honestly, I'm not sure I would bother visiting the castle, as it is quite expensive and not that cool inside. But it is amazing to look at from the outside and can be seen from much of the city. If you want to view the city from above, you can climb Arthur's Seat or Carlton Hill. If you want to see a different side of the city, you can go down to Leith by the ocean. Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland and serves as a cultural centre. If you go there in the summer, you will see street performers and all sorts of other interesting things. You might even catch one of the famous summer festivals. If you go there in late April, I would recommend going to the Beltane Fire Festival. It's one of the weirdest, most bizarre, and at the same time most awesome things you will ever visit. In August, Edinburgh hosts the world-famous Fringe Festival. This attracts musicians, comedians, and other sorts of performers from around the world. You will have big names performing right next to nobodies who are just trying to start out. The city does get expensive at this time, so if you are not interested in the festival, this probably isn't the best time to visit. Edinburgh is surrounded by beautiful Scottish countryside. If you can, a tour of the Scottish Highlands can be a great experience too. So, those are my favorites. I'd like to give an honorable mention to the nation of Iceland. While the city of Reykjavik was cool, it probably wasn't cool enough to make this list. However, when I was there, I met some guys in the hostel and we rented a car and drove around the Icelandic countryside. I got to see horses, mountains, cliffs, black beaches, glaciers, and an island that felt like it could be a totally different planet. Despite the fact that I was there in January, the temperatures were around freezing, which seems surprisingly warm for a nation called Iceland that is nearly in the Arctic Circle. Unfortunately, I did not see the aurora as the skies were not clear at night. Now, every photo you saw here, I took myself. If you would like to purchase printed versions of these photos that you can hang on your wall, or any other merchandise surrounding my channel, please visit the links in the description or isaacandsola.com. Thank you for watching.